Jungle.
Hello, you are listening to Trump Republic Radio. It is November 15th, 2017. I'm your host, Enzo Quesada, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Bobby Hester.
Hello, everyone.
And this week, we got on a very special interview with a very special individual who's done a lot more interesting things than we've ever done in our lives. He's been around the world. He's a former spy in the CIA, and he's running for the U.S. House of Representatives.
Texas District 21.
And that is Eric Burkhart.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
So, we first saw you speak at the College Republicans meeting we were at, what was it, like a month or two ago?
It was just over a month ago.
Yeah. And we were really enamored by your speech you gave to us. One of the most interesting speeches I've ever received in my life. So, I'm going to ask you to tell us your very interesting and unique story, and then we're going to get into some policy questions we have for you, since we do want to, probe you since you're a candidate.
You know, when I speak, I get a lot of questions regarding my background and how exactly I got into the CIA, because so many people seem to have a little bit of interest in that kind of life. And I share my life with them because there's nothing really spectacular about my background. I was raised in Europe, but my father was in the Army. I am from the San Antonio area. I went to the same high school as Bobby, Judson High School. And I went to Texas State University, graduated with a degree in geography. One of the best universities in the country for geography degree. With that degree, I was able to get a job overseas. And as a very young man, 22, 23 years old, I went and lived in Africa and did design work, which is what I was trained to do with my geography degree. When I came back to the States to work on my master's, the Department of Justice, INS, I ran into some people who convinced me to come work for them. And I did, and I went through their training regimen. I went through the Immigration Academy, learning about immigration law. I went to the Border Patrol Spanish immersion course, and ended up as an immigration inspector working in Laredo, Texas on the bridges. Learned so much about immigration during that time. Being from Texas, I thought I knew everything, and I really didn't know anything. There's such a human element to it, and it's very important to keep that in mind when you are discussing immigration and immigration reform. It was while I was working for INS in Huntsville, processing foreign nationals for deportation, that I ran into someone from the CIA, and they aggressively attempted to get me to apply. I didn't think I really had the background for it, but I did apply. They were very interested in my language skills and my overseas living experience. I applied. It took 8 to 10 months for the process to run its course, and I was hired as an operations officer, which is the nomenclature used in the business for spy. The CIA has 20,000 some odd people working, and the vast majority of them are not operations officers. They're not operational at all. Most of them live and work in Northern Virginia and in Washington, D.C., and they are the support staff, the support mechanism that keeps things going for those of us that went overseas to collect that intelligence that our government needs. I spent 2 years training at the CIA. It was extremely intensive, most difficult thing I've ever been through, but also the most rewarding. When I wrote my book, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the agency gave me a free rein to discuss the training program for the first time. I was very, very glad to have that honor. And because of that, I got into some great detail when I wrote my book about the training. A lot of people made movies about it, and there's a lot of conjecture. It's a lot of special operations stuff. jumping out of planes, climbing down mountains, living out in the woods. And then, of course, the most important part is learning tradecraft, learning how to be a spy, and learning how to keep the people that you meet and work with, learning how to keep them safe. My first tour after I completed my training and graduated from the program, which was in January 1999, was in Kosovo. I went to Kosovo because our military was in Kosovo and we needed to collect intelligence to keep our soldiers safe. It was there will always be a CIA element wherever our military is in place because we have to collect something called force protection intelligence to find out where the bad guys are planning to ambush and plant bombs that are intended to hurt our soldiers. So that's why I was in Kosovo. While I was there, I met a Russian who was working for an NGO, a non-governmental organization there, because there were a lot of refugees at the time with the conflict between the Albanians and the Serbians. And I started meeting him because he was giving me intelligence on Russian military issues. Washington was very excited. They said, keep meeting him. He knew who I was. He grew up as a son of a KGB officer, so he recognized an intel guy, and Washington said, come clean with him, so I did. Well, he began to poison me, unbeknownst to me. He was cooking meals for us while we were meeting operationally. He was very unhappy being in Kosovo. It was a punishment for him from his previous tour where he'd gotten into trouble. And that's why he decided to do what he did. It wasn't an order from his government. It was just him acting as a lone wolf. And he got me very sick. He almost killed me, but fortunately he was recalled back to Moscow. It took us a few years to find out exactly what was making me sick, and I continued my career with a lot of medical issues. But I had a very successful career. I was a case officer during 9/11, which is the seminal point in my life. I separate everything in my life from before 9/11 and after 9/11. It's very important from an intelligence officer perspective to explain to people that 9/11 changed how espionage is done in a lot of ways. Pre-9/11, most of espionage was focused on the diplomatic community and meeting people that worked out of embassies or worked for governments, and convincing them to give you secrets that they had access to for remuneration of some sort. 9/11 changed that because our target became terrorist organizations. We had to penetrate those organizations, and there's no remuneration for a terrorist outside of, I want to go to heaven and find my 40-some virgins. Very, very difficult to break into those groups, but the CIA has managed to do it. And they've had to adjust their training program a lot to start training officers how to work in those environments. My next real tour was in Iraq. After we went to war in 2003, I was with one of the first groups that arrived in Iraq. Being single, I was really able in a lot of ways to choose some of my assignments. And Iraq was an incredible opportunity for me for my career, and it was also rewarding because, as I mentioned before, force protection is so important, and that's all we reported on in Iraq was force protection, because our soldiers were getting blown up by something called an IED, an improvised explosive device, which is basically a hubcap turned upside down with some C4 inside and a detonator on the side of the road. And they were blowing up our Humvees as they were going by on patrol and taking out our guys. And we needed to find out about those devices and where they were planted before the ambushes took place. So that was a big deal for us, penetrating those organizations and finding out when there were any plans to attack our troops. Incredibly rewarding when you go to sleep at night knowing that you've been doing something that is going to save some lives. A lot of people say, how can you get any reward from doing that job when you can't tell anybody what you're doing? You can't tell anybody who you work for. I mean, I spent my entire career undercover. Even most of my family didn't know where I was working. And that's where you get the reward at night when you go to sleep and you say to yourself, you did your job today. And because of it, people are alive. And a lot of people don't have that opportunity. It's extremely rewarding. After Iraq, I had another tour in Africa, and after I completed that tour, I came back to the United States and worked a liaison position in Texas, working with federal law enforcement on border issues. We were trying to identify the networks that were focusing on special interest aliens, the aliens that come from Yemen and Egypt and Algeria and sneak into the country without documents. It became a problem because they resemble the same kind of person you would see coming from Michoacan or Guatemala or San Luis Potosi, and so they were ending up in the same groups as these other undocumented aliens. And of course the Obama administration, let's face it, was just releasing a lot of these people onto the streets. So we were trying to identify which networks were actually specializing in these people and trying to take them down. I ended up being obliged to retire in 2010 medically because my medical issues had become so intrusive in my life, and I retired with 100% disability sponsored by the CIA because of the toxic exposure. As part of it was my goal to regain my health and go back to work. I built a house in the hill country just north of Canyon Lake, and as part of my therapy, I started writing a book. I wrote my memoir, which is called Mukhabarat, baby, Mukhabarat, baby. Mukhabarat is the Arabic word for intelligence officer or spy. During my career, I heard that word almost every day when I was working overseas, and for some reason it just seemed appropriate for the title of my book. And when I wrote the book, I wasn't so much interested in selling a bunch of copies. It was really as therapy for me, and it really helped. I was able to regain a lot of my health and my mobility. And I went on a book tour for my book, and it was during this book tour, the latter part of the book tour, I had scheduled it to finish the book tour around my home in the Texas Hill Country. And I started speaking to a lot of groups in the Texas Hill Country about my career and my book. I was meeting with Tea Party groups, with Rotary groups, with Republican groups, and I started noticing a theme in every conversation that I was having with these people. A real unhappiness and dissatisfaction with what was happening in Washington. I wasn't terribly surprised. I was also unhappy after 8 years of Obama. I had to work with Obama as my boss, and at times with Hillary Clinton as my boss, and so I saw it from the inside. But I was very excited about the presidential election and the change that was coming, and I told people, we're going to make a change. It's true that, things are not going well. People also were extremely dissatisfied with Congress and how dysfunctional it had become. And they were really tired of the excuses. After the presidential election, we all know that the Democrats decided pretty early on to take steps to cripple the Trump agenda. Because they realized that if the Trump agenda passed, our economy would improve, our standing internationally would return to what it was, respect instead of friendship, which is much more important. And the Democrats knew that we wouldn't see another Democrat in the White House for decades if the Trump agenda passed. They realized how important that was, and so the Obama administration, during its last 3 months in office, actually abused its authority, abused the access to FISA law, abused the access to surveillance to try and create this false narrative of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence. It's all garbage, all of it. And that's why we are here now with the special investigator, and it's November 2017, and there's still no evidence, real evidence, pointing to any collusion. But it was that that effort on their part, and the fact that I saw nobody in Congress making an effort to stand up for this administration, including my own congressman. Occasionally, he would release a statement expressing support for President Trump, but you need leadership. You don't go to Congress just to vote. You go to Congress to to provide leadership on issues that matter. And so I decided to run against that 31-year incumbent. I was also really disgusted that anyone would spend 31 years in Congress. An intelligent man who reads the writings of the Founding Fathers knows that's not what they intended. They believed in representative democracy, which is the real key to returning Congress to its functionality. We need a Congress that represents the people, farmers, bakers, carpenters, lawyers, soldiers, policemen, teachers, nurses. Everybody's got to play a part. It can't be lobbyists and attorneys, which is what it is now. And that's why their access to the money is what keeps the incumbency rate at 95% in Congress. And as long as it's at 95%, we're not going to see a change. So I decided to run. I'm not a politician whatsoever. I've never run for office. I live on a disability income. I don't have access to the kind of funding that these others do. But I'm here, and I'm here for the right reasons. And that's basically why I've decided to run.
All right. Well, I really appreciate your story. You know, when we first heard it at the College Republicans meeting, I mean, I think I can speak for both of us when I say that we were both just kind of wowed by it. Frankly, we'd never met anyone who was a CIA spy before, so that alone was like, oh, this is really, really interesting. But, you know, hearing what you said, I think it really spoke to the two of us. It definitely did. Yeah. And so when we heard that you were running for Congress, we definitely knew that you were the guy who we really wanted to support. And in doing so, we actually have some policy questions that we would like to go ahead and ask you, just to get a feel for what type of representative you would be, what your political leanings are. So the first question we want to ask, in regards to this area, now San Antonio is Military City, USA. There are 3 military bases there and a couple other training bases. But the entire area is surrounded by many, many military veterans, especially out in the hill country where District 21 is. So we wanted to ask, what do you think actually needs to be done that isn't being done to help the veterans in this country?
Well, you picked one of the most important questions to ask up front. District 21 is somewhere between 25 and 30% families directly related to military veterans or active duty personnel. It is where people retire because of access to the military bases and the facilities, and most importantly, the VA. The VA is a vital lifeline for a lot of our disabled and injured veterans. And during my predecessor, Lamar Smith's time in office, the VA collapsed. I think that was very unfortunate because the warning signs were there. It should never have happened. And we had real heroes standing in lines trying to determine where they were going to get the treatment they needed to stay alive. My father was a veteran, 3 Purple Hearts, and he was still with us at that time. And I remember him trying to get appointments at the VA. And it was really difficult to watch. I can tell you, my father's my hero. He's a great American and a patriot. And he was having to wait in line with other heroes to try and get a little bit of treatment and an appointment a year down the road. Why the Obama administration let this problem fester and get as bad as it did, and Congress, as far as I'm concerned, is a real tragedy. That it should never happen. It should be addressed before we go into combat. Those tools should be in place before we send men and women into harm's way. And they come back and it's almost a forgotten issue. But for me, it's a number one priority. When people talk about funding and what's important to spend money on, that is an issue that I support.
Okay, the next question we have here, would you describe yourself as pro-life or pro-choice, and why?
I'm pro-life. I've been pro-life my life. I'm a Christian. I'm practicing Catholic, and I very much support the Right to Life movement. There's a culture in our community that unfortunately seems to grow, which really takes people away from respect for life. Not just the life of unborn children, but life in general. And it's part of this selfish attitude, me first, and don't make me responsible for my actions. This is one of the most difficult issues because it's something which can be avoided. And it isn't. For me, life begins at conception. I'm not a doctor, but I am an educated man, and I've not met anyone yet who's been able to explain to me otherwise. So for me, abortion is murder, and I am completely pro-life.
And now also regarding, I guess I could say, healthcare related questions, are you in favor of repealing the Affordable Care Act, especially the individual mandate? Now, I know that Congress is trying to get rid of, or at least the Senate in their tax plan is trying to get rid of the individual mandate, but would you support getting rid of both of those things?
Yes, absolutely. Rand Paul put together a really workable and functionable plan to replace the Affordable Care Act. And I believe that there was a lot of dislike for him personally that led to Congress not even giving him an opportunity to be heard. And that was really disappointing because it was the only plan that I've seen that I support completely. And I'm hoping that we can revisit it.
Okay, the next question. Do you support tax reforms such as what Congress is working on right now? What would you specifically like to see done?
Well, I believe in the fair tax. I believe in the flat tax. I believe in the user tax. I think that people should pay taxes on what they use. And when I sit down and do my taxes, it's difficult enough for me. And, I don't have a bank account full of a bunch of money. Can imagine how much it is for businesses, small and big businesses, to try and get through all that bureaucratic mess. We definitely need a workable tax plan, and we need something that's fair. This is an issue that always has been confusing to me because there do seem to be some really fair, honest options out there that should appeal to both sides, the fair tax in particular, the flat tax. And that's what I support.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that you'd worked on the United States border, you've worked with the Border Patrol. Do you support building a wall on the border with Mexico?
I do support building a wall for a number of different reasons. It's not going to be the end-all, fix-all, but it definitely sends a message. It sends a message that reminds people that we are a country, we are a nation. Every country is only as strong as the weakest part of its border. That's a sentence which sticks with me because it's simple and honest and true. This wall sends a message that we intend on enforcing our border laws, and our border patrol is going to be given the funds necessary to do that job. The Obama administration continued to fund Border Patrol to some extent, and they hired more officers. But at the same time, they created a real problem by allowing undocumented aliens to appear before a judge and get a document called a notice to appear, and then they were released a notice to appear to go see the judge and argue whether or not they had a right to amnesty or were under some sort of political oppression in their country, because our laws do allow people to apply for those options. That's what the NTA is for. It's to allow them to come back before the judge and make that argument. But they're supposed to stay in custody until then. The Obama administration was releasing them and telling them, this is your court date. How many of those people do you think actually showed up for their court date?
Probably none.
No, I think it's 99% doesn't. And so they were being released back out into the street. So we're spending billions of dollars to pick up these people, only to release them into the street. Let's just be honest about it. Why didn't Obama just get rid of the Border Patrol and save us the money, for goodness sake?
Yeah.
But that's my perspective.
Would you support immigration policies such as those in the RAISE Act, like limiting the amount of legal immigration, only allowing immigrants that are English-speaking and self-sufficient that have skilled labor?
To some extent. I'm not... the English-speaking is a little tricky for me because so many of the immigrants that have come to this country learn English immediately, and I think they should be given that option. There are some countries where people that are very skilled can come and join our workforce and become good Americans. They don't have the opportunity to learn English. So that one is a little bit of an iffy with me, but certainly we need to be very diligent on who we allow into this country. And, there should be some benefit to our economic system when it comes to who joins our labor force. So, I do support it, but I'm a little bit I'm not as concerned about the English-speaking only issue of it.
But you'd support like a merit-based immigration
Absolutely.
system as opposed to what we have now.
Absolutely.
And what is your stance on the removal of Confederate monuments?
And this is ridiculous. I'm waiting for someone to show me how the removal of one Confederate monument has led to better relations between the races. It's all a show. It's all meant to point fingers and create more victims. It's a circus by the left to try and remind everyone what a horrible racist society we have in this country, and it's all absolutely not true. It's a distraction from the real problems we have in our country. The left is supposed to be talking about bringing people together, and all they do is find more ways to take us apart. My heritage includes veterans from the Civil War. And, back then in 1860s, things were a lot different than they are now. And we are making judgments based on how life is now to judge the decisions people made back then. And I think that's wrong. I'll tell you, if they are successful in removing every monument for everybody that was ever a slaveholder, then the Washington Monument is going to have to come down, and the Jefferson Memorial is going to have to come apart. Monticello is going to have to be torn down, and the state of Washington is going to have to be renamed to something maybe Bill Clinton state. I don't know.
Yeah, it really allows politicians in cities that are failing to say, I did something for you, when
That's a
all
good
they did
point.
is they took down a statue that did nothing to anyone.
It's called politics of distraction.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the threat of Antifa and other violent communist groups across the country?
Even the existence of Antifa is an anathema to me. This is an organization that espouses the overthrow of our government and our system, and they are allowed to march and commit petty acts of violence, and they pull off the masks, and you're looking at a bunch of young people who have come from lives of no working, not needing to get a job, wealthy upbringing, and it's just disgusting to me. They don't understand history. They haven't been educated enough to know what they're talking about. And the only thing that makes me more angry is when I see them working against the First Amendment and fighting to keep people from speaking. The Antifa to me should be an illegal organization.
Yeah, we definitely agree with that one.
And a lot of people, they don't know, like, even in Texas, because it's so red, like, we still have a huge Antifa presence in Austin. And
Austin's Antifa presence is
one of the strongest in the country is Austin, and it's everywhere. People wouldn't suspect Texas has this problem, but we do.
I can tell you, without getting into trouble, that our intelligence communities have at times gone to our universities to ask the management of those universities, the dean and those folks, if they can work to further national security by possibly looking at the activities of foreign students that are coming to this country. And the reason why is because it's an open secret that Chinese students, many of them are fronts for the Red Army and the Chinese government, and they steal our secrets. And they do so because these universities all have government contracts. A lot of them have Defense Department contracts, research contracts that they work on. And a lot of these students are allowed to have servers that connect back to China, and we're not allowed access to them. We don't know what they're sending back to China. We don't know what kind of conversation is going on. They're working in these secure facilities without clearances, and the people that run these universities are saying, no, you can't come in here and have a look around. And we're going to wonder when the Chinese show up building things that we've done the research for.
I guess, yeah. Then the next question is, do you support current efforts to enforce voter ID laws? And do you think the current ones we have are too strict, not strict enough, or just about right?
Not strict enough. This is one of the easiest questions to answer. If someone is required to show a license to drive a car, then we should appreciate and value our electoral system enough to require people to show a license to vote.
Where's the next one? Oh, what reforms do you believe need to take place regarding education?
Well, we're on that subject. We have a tendency to dumb down our educational system so that no one has to feel bad for not performing as well as everyone else. And that, to me, is not the way to create functional students and functional young people. Our educational system, public educational system, really is broken. And we need to go back and look at what worked in the past, and look at moving away from this idea that everybody's a victim, including every student. And our university system is dominated by liberal academics. And, that's a tradition in this country, and it's not something that so much bothers me because I've gotten used to it. What bothers me is that they've become so active outside of the classroom. People that teach need to teach, and on their free time, go and be political. But they're bringing their politics into the classroom, and that, to me, has got to stop. Anyways.
And the next question is, what do you think about the modern relevance of NATO?
NATO is still relevant. Russia has been making efforts to rebuild its military potential. I don't want to give them too much credit. A lot of people give the Russian military too much credit. It's not the force that some people think it is. In particular, their nuclear arsenal is a big mess. We have our people over there trying to clean it up, free of charge, by the way. But NATO is a military force that allows us to stay involved in what's taking place in Europe, and that is important to me. We still have troops in Europe. We still have very vital business interests in Europe. And even though the Europeans sometimes have a tendency to be their own worst enemy, we have to do what we can to stay engaged there. And NATO's a big part of that. It's also very good for our defense industry because most of those countries do in some way or another buy military hardware from the United States. So I think that we can envision NATO eventually disappearing from the scene, but for the moment, I think it's still relevant.
Okay. In your opinion, what global threats to America do you think need to be resolved?
My goodness. Global threats to America. Well, first and foremost, I'm concerned about the issue of terrorism. I do believe that we have a real problem with sleeper cells in many of our communities, and that one day is going to come into play. Someone's going to activate these people someday, and it's going to be a real problem. Immigration is important. Putting into place some of those new rules that we talked about, and the merit-based system for immigration. Also, consistent full background checks. What Donald Trump tried to do when he first came into office was so reasonable. It wasn't what did the press say? Ban on Muslims, ban on Muslims. And it was exactly just the opposite. What it was we want to do a proper background check. So we're going to take 3 more months before we allow these people to come in and make sure that these are the people we want in our country. There was no ban, but the left took that word and ran with it. But another issue that's very important to me, during the Obama administration, entered into some trade agreements with just about any country that was willing to talk to us in order to get people to sign the Paris Climate Accord. The Obama administration made agreements that put us underwater in trade agreements with a lot of countries so that they would sign the Paris Climate Accord. That's about as un-American as you can get as far as I'm concerned. And President Trump is determined to renegotiate those bad agreements, and he's just the man for the job. It's one of the reasons why I voted for him, because he knows what needs to be done, and he knows what's fair. NAFTA needs to be taken apart and put back together so that it's fair to the American worker. At the end of the day, I don't necessarily want a leg up everywhere. I just want what's fair, because if you let the American worker compete in an environment that's fair, he's always going to come out on top.
On that same regard, do you think that North Korea poses a serious threat to the United States?
No, I don't. The North Koreans have yet to find a way to deliver their nuclear warheads. In order to, it's one thing to have a bomb, it's another thing to be able to deliver it. And that's the problem that the Iranians are having as well. These little tin horn dictators, they wanted the bomb first so that they could be a big shot in their little area. And then once they get it, then they want to be a big shot in a bigger area. So now they've got to try and find a delivery mechanism. Well, it's not easy. It's easier to build the bomb than it is to deliver it. Now, I am concerned about Japan, and I'm certainly concerned about South Korea. But at the end of the day, someone's got to be responsible for themselves. And I do applaud the South Koreans and the Japanese for building up their militaries. Both have very strong conventional militaries, and a lot of that is because of us, because they use American equipment. But the real threat from Kim Jong-un and his family is in the local environment, Japan and South Korea. There is no reasonable argument that he's going to be able to deliver a warhead to Hawaii. So that I think is the best way to answer that question. Something needs to be done, absolutely. Another problem with Kim Jong-un is that he will proliferate his nuclear knowledge. It was proliferated to him from Russia and from India and Pakistan, different places. Those little those poor countries that sell their knowledge, and he will do the same. So that's something to be concerned about. The sooner he's gone, the better.
Do you think the United States should pull out of Afghanistan completely?
Well, that depends. If we make the decision to win that war, no. If we're going to continue putting our troops in a foreign country and telling them to fight a defensive war, then take them out. This is the Vietnam lesson. You can't put U.S. troops in a foreign country and tell them to fight a defensive war. When you put soldiers overseas in combat, they need to have a clear vision of what the goal is, to win the war. And then you use everything in your arsenal that you can to end it as quickly as possible, because that means the fewer casualties that you're going to have. In this situation, we've got people that are sitting there as targets, and that has to end. If it were up to me, we would go in there and clean them out and then get out. Because I'd hate to pull out now and have parents who lost children over there have to sit back and say, what did my child die for? So I definitely think, do it or get off the pot, as they say.
Now, pivoting a little bit to you actually running for Congress here, what skills do you believe that you possess that other candidates would not, that would lend itself to being a good representative?
Well, when you take a look at the issues that are important to Texas voters, the issues that always show up in the top 5: immigration, foreign affairs, terrorism, jobs, the dysfunction of Congress. I am the only candidate up to this point who has actually graduated from the Department of Justice Immigration Academy. I understand immigration law. I had the authority to prosecute immigration law while I was working on a bridge in Laredo, Texas. I understand immigration. I understand what needs to be done to fix the problem. When speaking of foreign affairs, I spent a career overseas working as a case officer for the CIA. Every nation that I worked in, I had to become educated on the history of that nation and politics before being allowed to work there. So I understand foreign affairs and what we need to get back to in the United States to be strong internationally again. I'm very familiar with the terrorism target and the terrorism issue and the threat that it poses to our local communities. Again, I think that I have much more experience in that regard than anyone who is running besides myself. I've lived in D.C. I've worked on the fringes of Congress, and I've seen inside of the monster, and I understand why we need to drain the swamp. I know what has made Congress dysfunctional, and I know what needs to be done to make it work again for the people. Again, I'm the one candidate who has worked and lived in D.C. and know these problems. Those are the issues that stand out for me that make me a better candidate.
And, you know, it's kind of a given since you do say drain the swamp, but you do support term limits for Congress, right?
I signed the term limits pledge early on in my journey to become a congressman. The pledge I signed limits members of the House of Representatives to 6 years, 3 terms. And certainly that is something that I support 100%. Not just term limits in Congress, but term limits in the Senate as well. Another issue that isn't spoken of is the problem with Obama hired a bunch of political operatives to run different important jobs in Washington, D.C., in the Department of Defense, Department of Justice, Department of Agriculture. He filled jobs that should have gone to the next qualified candidate with political operatives. And that was so that he could build a firewall when investigations started, and it worked. That's where the Janet Lerner came from. That's where the Janet Napolitano came from. And the little bald guy from IRS. They did their job. They presented a firewall for the Obama administration so that he could get away with what he was doing. But definitely some house cleaning is in order.
What advice would you give to young people to succeed in life?
My goodness. Well, you know, responsibility is the first word that comes to mind. Don't allow someone to paint you as a victim. Realize that you live in the greatest country that our humanity has ever created, with opportunities that you won't find anywhere else. Have confidence in yourself, have faith in your Creator, and be responsible for the actions that you take. Our society is going to tell you there's always someone else that will take responsibility for what you do, and that it's always someone else's fault when you screw up. Admit it when you screw up and get over it and get on with it. Because, as I said, you can do anything that you want to do. I'm a perfect example of that.
And lastly, for these policy questions, hypothetically, if you were given complete control of the U.S. government, what 3 changes would you implement?
Boy, that's a bit of a trick question there. 3? Number 1, I believe that our military needs an overhaul, and that includes the VA. And we need to put it in the hands of the military because they know the job better than we do. Immigration reform is hugely important. Immigration has become such a problem because our borders are basically open at this point. We need to return the enforcement tools to the Border Patrol and to the people who are trained to do that job, and create a merit-based system for immigrants from this point on. I also believe that we've got to continue rolling back onerous and unnecessary regulations on business small and medium-sized businesses that, again, is a reflection of the Obama administration. We have businesses now struggling with regulations that are supposed to be connected to the EPA that really do nothing. And it makes it almost impossible for our businesses to compete with their competitors overseas. People ask me all the time, why when I go into Walmart is everything made in China? Well, there's the answer. Because our businesses have been regulated out of competitiveness with these other businesses overseas. So those are certainly some of the more important term limits. If I can sneak that in there as a fourth. We need to rejuvenate our government with fresh faces and fresh ideas and people who are more connected to real society and not millionaire lobbyists and attorneys who run our political system today.
And moving on to some more general questions here. Obviously, we kind of know the answer to a couple of these, but we want to get your opinion on the last 4 presidents that we've had, which includes Donald Trump, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton. Where
would you like me to start?
I guess
with Donald Trump.
Start with Donald Trump and then go back from there.
I support President Trump 100%. I have to say I'm not the biggest fan of Twitter. But, Donald Trump is not a politician. He's a businessman. And we certainly didn't expect him to come in being as delicate as some of the people that are acting offended at everything that he does. I believe that he knows what needs to be done to continue to strengthen our economy and to reestablish our place in the world vis-a-vis Russia and China and the EU. So I am a big supporter of President Trump and his agenda. George W. Bush. I'm very disappointed with the Bush family very recently. I think that they took what happened to Jeb Bush personally, and because of it, they can't see past supporting what needs to be done in this country to get us back where we need to be. While he was president, I think that he was a good president for the most part. Spent a little bit too much money, but when he chose to get us into the war in Iraq, he did so because he realized we needed to create a military footprint in that part of the world in order to take the fight to the backyard of the enemy. Because if you do that, you're not going to have the war fought in your own backyard, which is what 9/11 is. We went into Iraq. I know that the weapons of mass destruction was used as a bit of an excuse to go there. But in doing so, we were able to clean out Al-Qaeda. And we did. The problems we face now are ISIS and not Al-Qaeda anymore. Although in the last 8 years, they have also popped back up on the scene. When George Bush was president, we chased all of those characters out of their own comfort zones. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which was a branch of Al-Qaeda, ended up in Syria with just a few members, but because of what was going on there, they were able to reconstitute themselves, and now they call themselves ISIS. A lot of people don't realize that, but that is the genesis of ISIS. They were originally an Al-Qaeda branch that we kicked the crap out of as part of the insurgency in Iraq. I think George Bush did a very good job after 9/11 bringing the country together. I will say that I think he was there too long, and the politics began to get to him. It's a passing grade, but I do have some issues with George Bush. Are we at Bill Clinton?
Yes.
We also have Barack Obama.
Oh, I just skipped right over Barack, didn't I? That's what I like to do. Just skip right over Barack.
No, I was just thinking, if only we didn't have to talk about
if only.
it.
Barack Obama was the worst president in my memory, and I think if history proves true, will end up being the worst president we've ever had. He took efforts to really discredit us on a national stage, and he started immediately with the apology tour. He traded U.S. interests on an international stage to get people to sign the Paris Climate Accord. He came in promising great things with regards to race relations, and race relations are worse now in this country than they've ever been. He was president for 8 years, and every year the violence in Chicago continued to grow, with young black men blowing each other away on the streets to the tune of, 10, 15 a week. Never once convened a conference to discuss it, never once brought people together from the community to try and fix that problem. 8 years in his own community, where he was a community organizer, turned a blind eye to it. It's really very sad to me. You're not. I can sit here all day and talk about Barack Obama, but you're not going to be able to get a positive word out of me. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was a politician. Bill Clinton took a lot of credit for our economy rebounding, which really should have gone to Congress and Newt Gingrich with the contract with America. But Bill Clinton played the game, and he was willing to work with the Republican Congress. I give him credit for that. I think Bill Clinton should have been in jail for committing perjury, which he did. It doesn't matter who you are; you can't be exempt from the laws of the land. And he lied in a deposition, in the Paula Jones deposition. Not only lied then, he lied to all of us as well. It's funny how those kind of sexual picadillos only become important to the Democrats when it's a Republican, like we see now with Senator Judge Moore running for senator. When Bill Clinton was in office, and everybody knows that he's a predator, no one seems to want to talk about that. But the Clintons are a political machine. There's a bit of sociopathic energy to the two of them. The ends justifies the means, and the sooner we see the last of them, the better.
Okay. And then we're just going to go through some current political figures in the landscape, since you might have to work with them if you do get into Washington. Just what are your opinions on, the following? So what do you think of Paul Ryan?
I think Paul Ryan has been a big disappointment, and he's let his job go to his head. He believes that compromise at the end of the day is the best result regardless, and sometimes things are more important that shouldn't compromise for him.
What do you think of Mitch McConnell?
Mitch McConnell, you can just say what I said and paste it. Actually, Mitch McConnell's been there a lot longer. Mitch McConnell should have been retired some time ago. My family's from Kentucky, half of it, and I can tell you they've become very disenchanted with him as well. He's leading this charge against Judge Moore right now, and it's so obvious that it's because he was unhappy that the guy that he wanted to win, that he spent $40 million on, lost. And, I'm just disgusted with politics as usual, and when I think of politics as usual, I think of Mitch McConnell.
Yeah. Talking about politics as usual, what do you think of John McCain?
John McCain is disgusting. He has become such a proponent of victimhood and such a knee-jerk actor with regards to pointing the finger at conservatives and Republicans. Again, another character that should have been retired a long time ago. Lindsey Graham. There are some things that I've seen him do that I appreciate, and others not. He's also a very, very political figure, and I think that he really intended at one time to run for president seriously. And I think he's unhappy that it hasn't happened, and he hasn't really caught on.
He didn't even get 1%, so.
That's true, but Rand Paul is my guy, and he didn't either, so.
Yeah, so you jumped on Lindsey Graham, that was the next one, but what do you think of Ted Cruz?
I like Ted Cruz. I support Ted Cruz. For a while, he was my candidate for president. And I haven't seen him do anything yet that would cause me to change my opinion.
What do you think of Governor Greg Abbott?
I like Greg Abbott as well. I think Greg Abbott's got courage. And I think I appreciate the way that he stared down Joe Strauss and stood up for some of the conservative issues that the legislature was facing. I like Greg Abbott.
And then rounding out the Republicans in office, what do you think of Rand Paul?
I like Rand Paul a lot. He was originally the one that I was supporting for president until he dropped out. I think he's a brilliant man. He's very emotional, and hasn't done a very good job separating those emotions from his politics. But I don't know necessarily that that's a bad thing. He's a lot more reasonable than his father, who I think also had some good ideas. But I like Rand Paul.
Okay, now we're going to go into some Democrats. What do you think of Nancy Pelosi?
Nancy Pelosi is a hypocrite and a crook. And she and her husband have made so much money off of her position and her influence. She's very suited to the people she represents. She's a problem, and she has never agreed to a compromise that was fair. And that's all I can say.
Okay. What do you think of Senator Chuck Schumer?
Chuck Schumer is a real politician there. He was able to make himself cry because of President Trump's attempts to get our immigration under control, and yet he keeps a straight face for soldiers killed overseas. He's a hypocrite, and he's a political machine, and again, very, very representative of the people that of his constituents.
What do you think of Senator Bernie Sanders?
Hey, Bernie's honest to an extent. Absolutely, he calls himself a socialist. He is a socialist. I lost a little bit of respect for him when he allowed the Clintons to run all over him and manipulate that electoral process, and then end up supporting them, even though he knew at the time that they had basically stolen the primaries from him. He is an anachronism that has a place in our political system because it's open to all. But he's never going to get my vote.
What do you think of former Vice President Joe Biden?
Joe Biden scares me because the Democrats have recrafted him into someone that gives the appearance of being a moderate. He's not. He's about as left as you can get. He's an angry man. And he also has aspirations of being president, and I think we'll see him in 2020. And I look forward to not voting for him.
Then, rounding out the Democrats, what do you think of Senator Elizabeth Warren?
Elizabeth Warren is a real bad character. She has done more to harm our military. She and the one from New York, Nancy Gillibrand, they have done more to cause the military to start investigating soldiers coming back from overseas for crimes and so on and so forth, and bringing soldiers up for court-martial who end up getting acquitted. And she's another America hater who believes that our existence on this planet is predicated on slavery and abusing every other nation on this planet. At the same time, she's a known liar, trying to pass herself off as related to Pocahontas or or whoever it was. And, just brush that off without even an apology, which really should have had a real impact on the Native Americans community here in this country.
And the last name that I want to get your thoughts on that is not an elected official, but is someone who has a big presence in politics at the moment, and that is Steve Bannon. I
am really grateful to Steve Bannon. If it weren't for Steve Bannon, we would be stuck with Fox News and nothing else to represent a conservative perspective. Breitbart is the real voice of conservative America as far as I'm concerned. And he puts up with so much in his life because of his faith and dedication to real American principles. He is castigated, he is cursed, and for me, he's a true leader in our country today. And I'm a big supporter of his. I hope one day I get the honor to shake his hand.
And that rounds up all the questions that we have. Do you have any questions for Eric, Bobby?
No, all the questions I had we read down here. So
there is one thing I'd like to mention. When I spoke to your class, I explained a little bit about what espionage is and how people go about collecting intelligence overseas. And I think it's important for people to understand that. First and foremost, I want everyone to know that CIA officers, not agents, that word is not used in the CIA, that's a law enforcement term. CIA officers have no authority whatsoever domestically. No authority in the United States, no arrest authority, and no authority to carry a weapon. The only CIA employees who carry a weapon domestically are the security personnel at our facilities. So if anyone ever tells you they're the CIA and they've got a 45 on their hip, you need to get away as quickly as possible. But about the issue of espionage, the CIA trains people to meet foreign nationals who have access to information that they need, that our government needs to stay ahead of the game internationally. That can be someone from China, that can be someone from Russia, that can be someone from the Sudan. These people, they work in environments that allow U.S. persons access to them that can use cover in foreign countries. CIA officers use that cover in foreign countries to meet these people. What's most important that I need to stress is that the people who do agree into these relationships, they put their lives on the line, and they put the lives of their families on the line, because if they're discovered meeting with an American, that's it for them. A lot of these people enter into these relationships to share secrets with us because they believe in the United States and they believe in freedom and democracy, and they want to see those changes in their country, and they're doing their part. Their little part, what they can do to bring those changes about in their own home. And I've met some incredibly brave people. I've recruited some brave people. And, I honor them for their courage. Some of them are still out there meeting with our officers. And I just, it's important for me that people realize that it's a dangerous game and it's an important game. Human intelligence has always been the key to keeping us ahead. And that's important for me to stress.
I actually have a kind of a miscellaneous question that's totally different from everything else. When you were speaking to the college Republicans meeting, someone had asked something about your opinion on the JFK assassination, and we did a midweek episode where we covered just historical facts
and
about it.
And what came out in the new releases, because there's some good stuff in there.
So we just wanted to ask, what do you think actually happened there?
Well, the CIA is a very need-to-know organization. It's very compartmentalized, and people ask me questions about things like, where are the aliens, and what about this and what about that? And if there were aliens, it would be handled by a completely different directorate than what I worked for. It would be handled by the Directorate of Science and Technology. I worked for the Directorate of Operations, so my purview was very limited to what I had need to know. I don't know any secrets about the Kennedy assassination. I can only tell you my opinion from my experience with weapons. There's no doubt in my mind, as a private citizen, that Kennedy was shot from the front and from the grassy knoll, because I've seen that gross Zapruder film enough to know that when a bullet impacts with an object like head, it's going to react in the opposite direction, and that's what Kennedy's head does. It jerks backwards because he was shot from the front. Now, there are physics experts and so on and so forth that will come in and explain how that can happen, but it's just common sense to me, and I tell people, go out and stick a watermelon on a hedge post somewhere and take a rifle and shoot it, and you tell me what direction it moves in. To me, that's very simple. That and the fact that they are attributing rifleman skills to Oswald, who was a good shot, that are just not possible with that old Italian rifle he was using. It's just not possible to get that many shots off that accurately in that short a period of time. So that's my opinion on that issue.
Well, with that, I don't have anything else. You have anything, Bobby?
No, that's the only question I wanted to ask.
If you have anything you want to pitch on the show before we head out, maybe where to contact you?
Well, I'm all over the place. I've been in every county, and I continue to travel around, shaking hands and meeting people. Spent quite a lot of time at the university lately, which makes me so happy. I love this school. It's very important to me. And I even come and sit through those horrible football games, and I will continue to do so. I want to stress to everyone who is in District 21 who might be listening to this broadcast, I am the real outsider. My only interest in getting involved in this process is to try and make things right. And, I could retire and sit back and go fishing and watch football, but, this is very important to me. And, I'm always looking for volunteers and, of course, any donations anybody might want to give. My website is Burkhart, Burkhart, 2018.com. It's pretty simple. Burkhart2018.com, and that's Burkhart without the D, Burkhart. Please visit my website, and you'll see everything you need to see about me. And if you're interested in my book, just Google my name, and it'll pop up. Thank you guys very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to your listeners. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. And we'll put those links to those things in the description.
Great.
So if anyone wants to, see his website or see his book, you can just look in the description.
Yep.
And with that, I just want to say thank you, Eric, for coming on. It was very interesting, very good interview, one of the best we've had. And thank you, listeners, for listening to another episode of Trump Public Radio, and have a good one.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.